Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. It's time once again for my quarterly book haul, and if you're new to my channel, this is something I do every quarter to kind of take stock of all of the books that are entering my library and to see where I'm at with my goal to reduce my overall owned TBR, which this quarter, I am glad to say, is continuing to move in the correct direction, which is interesting because I think this is the biggest haul that I've had this year, but it's also the haul where I've had the greatest proportion of books that I've already read before filming this, and it's also a quarter where I did pretty significant unhauls kind of at the end of last quarter and beginning of this quarter, and I feel like I've managed to pare down my library pretty well to things that I'm just excited to read, and I'm really happy with the progress overall. I'm also really excited about all the new books that are entering my library, so I think to go through this haul, we'll start by talking about the books I have already read, since there are several of them, and then after that we'll dive into the unread books. So the first book I bought and already read is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. I got this one as an audiobook because it's a kind of multimedia podcasty book, and I really wanted to listen to it, plus I needed to read it for my workbook club, and that seemed like the easiest way to do it, and I loved this one. I'm really glad that we picked it up for the book club because I probably wouldn't have read it otherwise, but it was a ton of fun. Highly recommend the audiobook for that. Then we've got Model Home by River Solomon. This is a book that I bought day one. I think I found out it was coming out like a week or so before it came out, and I went day one to pick it up and started reading it on the way home. I was not driving, obviously, but I was so excited to read this one, and I read it immediately. It completely lived up to my expectations and really cemented that I will just read anything that River Solomon writes. Around the same time, I seem to have been on a haunted house kick because I also picked up We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. I'd seen so many good reviews for this one, and this was another one that completely lived up to my expectations. Everybody else who's saying this book is fantastic is right. I had so much fun reading this one, and I'm glad that I picked it up because this was, again, another one that I wasn't really aware of initially, or one that I would have picked up, I think, on my own, but so many people were reading it and saying it was great, and they are absolutely correct. Then we've got A Map to the Door of No Return by Dion Brand. This is a book I read earlier in the spring for a class I was taking, and I really enjoyed it. It's a creative nonfiction kind of examining Brand's life in the Black diaspora and kind of that experience of living in the diaspora. It was a really interesting take on it, and again, it was creative nonfiction, so it has this kind of unusual format where you're kind of bouncing between different parts of Brand's life and these other kind of historical events that have happened. It was just really interesting, well written, and I wanted to have a copy of my own because I read it as a library book, so I picked it up so I could reread it and annotate it sometime in the future. The next four things I'll talk about together because I then did another instance of my like trying new horror manga videos. Currently there's only 2 instances of that. I've done it twice. Had a great time both times. But these were the 4 that I picked up for the most recent episode. So we have I'm the Grim Reaper Volume 1 by Graveweaver, Corpse Party Blood Covered Volume 1, which is actually a bind-up of Volumes 1 and 2, by Makoto Kadoin and Toshima Shinomiya. Then we have Another by Yukito Ayatsuji and Hiro Kiyohara, which is a full omnibus, and PTSD Radio Volume 1 by Masaki Nakayama. This one is also a bind-up of Volumes 1 and 2. I had a really great time with this. I feel like overall this was a more successful episode. I didn't find anything that I just absolutely loved, like new favorite, but I found several things I'm interested to continue on with, so I feel like this was a really successful episode of that sort of series. I'm considering expanding it to other genres next year. The last 2 I have here are both kind of novellas that I picked up. One of them is by one of my favorite authors. So we have In the Shadow of the Ship by Elliot de Bedard. This is another Zoo Universe novella, and this one's kind of a gothic horror-y take on the sci-fi world that she's built here. We're following a character who has to return back to the ship that they grew up on, where they experience some really horrific things and are kind of dealing with like the threat of the ship itself. So this was interesting, but definitely not my favorite thing in this series or from this author. But then the other one that I've got here, the other novella, is The No Mask Murder by Akamitsu Takagi. And this was so interesting. I think this isn't like the best mystery I've ever read, but it does some really interesting things. I think it's got an interesting kind of framing device, and the author is a character in it, which I thought was kind of fun. And I just had a good time reading this. It's a weird book about weird people, and I really liked the kind of cleverness of parts of the mystery. There were a few things that I think were a little overly complicated, but overall I felt like this was a really well plotted out mystery, and I highly recommend it. So those are all of the books I've already read. I think moving into the unread books, we'll start with the Christmas books, because it is actually currently Christmas as I'm filming this. I can't remember if I've already said that or not. But today's Christmas, and this is kind of where I've gotten the last few books I'm anticipating will enter my library in this year. I'm not planning to buy any more books in the last 6 days. So we'll start with the books I got for Christmas, I think. So I have 4 of them. my mom bought me The Iliad by Emily Wilson, which I've been wanting to give a try. I was wanting to try and read The Iliad anyway, but I had heard some good things about Emily Wilson's translations as being fairly approachable, so I thought this would be a good place to start. And then also, another one that's actually been on my Christmas list for a couple of years now. I've been kind of debating back and forth buying it for myself, but I finally have gotten House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. I've seen so many people read this, and a few people who I trust their reviews have really enjoyed this as kind of a experience. So that's why I was interested in it. I really want to give it a try because I get the sense it's going to be a really interesting reading experience overall, and I kind of want to know what it's like. So I'm excited to give this a try. I have kind of flipped through just to see some of the different formatting, and I think it's going to be a challenge, but like a really fun one. The other two books I got for Christmas are both the ends of trilogies that I'm really enjoying. My aunt got me both of these, and I got to tell her thank you already. Luckily, we were having dinner with them. It was really nice. It was a good little like pre-Christmas celebration. But she got me The Bound Worlds by Megan E. O'Keefe and Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. So these are the ends of the Devoured Worlds and the First Law trilogies, and I'm loving both of these. For both of these series, I've read book one and loved it, and I'm hoping to finish both of these series in 2025. So works out perfectly in my favor that now I can just kind of binge through second and third books in each of these. The next book I have here is another one that I didn't buy, but I actually won this one in a giveaway. This is Henry V by Dan Jones. I won this in a giveaway that was run by Michael Kist, whose channel I will try to remember to link below. But this one is a biography of Henry V that's written in like present tense. So it's really interesting. I have started it. I'm on like chapter 3, and I'm hoping to finish this early next year, but it's just an interesting take on a biography, and it's kind of gotten me interested in reading more history and more historical biographies. So kind of on that note, I then picked up Crusaders by Dan Jones. This is another era of history I'm just really interested in learning about. I wrote a paper actually a little bit about kind of the later years of the Crusades when things had really kind of wound down, and some of the changes that were happening in the church at the time, and some of the critiques that Chaucer seems to be including in the Canterbury Tales. That's kind of was part of the focus of that paper, and I really enjoyed reading about that period of history at the time. So I figured since I was liking Henry V, I also wanted to pick up Crusaders. I think the next several of these are all books that I pre-ordered. So these were mostly things by authors I already knew I loved. So we have The Legacy of Arniston House by T.L. Huchu. This is the fourth book in the Edinburgh, I almost call it the Edinburgh trilogy. It's the Edinburgh Night series. This is obviously not a trilogy because this is book 4, but I am loving this series so much. I really love the protagonist in this one, and I'm excited to see where the story goes from here. It also looks like this one is going to be particularly emotionally devastating, so I'm a little bit scared, but also excited to read it because, again, I just love the series so much. Then I picked up Sword Crossed by Freya Marske. This was another pre-order. I've started her Last Binding trilogy and absolutely love it, so I'm really excited to see what this one's like because I believe this one is a standalone. Then we have Uncanny by Junji Ito, which is a memoir / a retrospective on his work that I'm finding very interesting. This is another one that I have already started, so haven't finished it, but I'm a pretty good chunk of the way through, and I'm really enjoying this. It's a really interesting read and kind of learning more about Junji Ito's influences and his work and kind of what led him to become a manga artist, and it's just been a really interesting experience to learn about that. And then my final pre-order was Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. So many people loved The Sword of Kaigen that I was intrigued to see this one because I think this premise is a little more interesting to me. This is kind of a dark academia thing-ish where we have a character who is the first woman working in a very male-dominated ministry in the city that she lives in, and she gets paired up with a guy who's a janitor as her like sidekick, but he turns out to have been an outsider from like outside the magical walls that protect them all, and the two of them start to unravel a conspiracy together. I think that sounds super fun, and I read the first chapter and it made me cry, so I'm very excited to pick this one up. The rest of these are all just like random books that I picked up on random shopping trips. I think I have at least one audiobook in here. Actually, we'll talk about the audiobook first because I had Audible for like 3 months because they were doing like a 99 cents for 3 months thing for a little bit there, and I picked up that Listen for the Lie with that deal. So this was kind of the other book that I got at the end was Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman, because I've heard so many good things about this audiobook as well. And I'm kind of interested in trying to read all of the books that were nominated in the horror category this year for Goodreads Choice, because so many of them were books that were on my radar, things I was already interested in. And I think that was the category I'd read the most in already. All 2 of them. Great job, me. But yeah, I was really interested in picking this one up. I've heard great things about the audiobook specifically. I know it's narrated from the perspective of a small child, so I think it's going to be really creepy and really fun. Then we've got Nicked by M.T. Anderson, and this one is one of the most like completely on a whim purchases I've made all year. I don't very often just pick up books completely on a whim. Usually I have some sense of, you know, kind of how the reviews are, whether I'm interested in the premise, things like that. But this one was on the new releases shelf at my local Barnes & Noble, and I just picked it up because I thought the cover was kind of cool with this skull being stolen away. And it turns out to be a medieval heist story, kind of based on real history. And so I'm immediately intrigued. It calls it like a queer swashbuckling adventure in the cover. So I'm very excited to give this a try. It just sounds super fun. And I read the first couple of pages, and it does have that kind of feel of like a medieval text to it, so I think that this is going to be like a really interesting experience, and it just sounded like a super fun read. During that same trip, I also picked up The Bog Wife by Kay Chronister. This one was one I actually went in looking for. This is following a family in the Appalachian Mountains. This is specifically Appalachian Gothic, but it's following this family that have a cranberry bog, and once a generation they sacrifice their patriarch to the bog, and the bog gives them a bog wife who helps them continue on their family line. But this is following a group of siblings fairly far down the generations, and this time the bog does not give them a bog wife, and they are having to grapple with the fallout of that for their family and kind of figure out what's going on. So it sounds super creepy and interesting, and I don't know what to expect here because I haven't seen a lot of reviews, but I am interested in trying more like gothic fiction and kind of gothic fiction from different regions. I just think it's really interesting and fun, so I'm curious to see kind of what themes this book is going to explore. Another book I picked up on a whim, but this time on a shopping trip with Mom, and not without like having some knowledge of it, The Restaurant of Lost Recipes by Hisashi Kashiwai. This is the second book in the Kamigawa Food Detective series. I love the first book. My mom also loves the first book, so I picked this one up so we can both read it. This is basically a series of short vignettes of this father-daughter duo who recreate dishes from people's pasts, and it's like they're a little detective agency, but they figure out how to make the food that you had when you were like a child or many years ago in a specific event, and it's just really fun. It's really heartwarming. Every story has some sort of like little message to it, and it's just a really good book if you want a cozy, comforting time, or at least the series is. The first book is. I'm sure this one will also be the same. Next up, I have another book I bought the same day I bought Crusaders. This was The Stardust Grail by Yume Kitase. This is a short sci-fi heist novel that sounds incredible, following some people who are looking for an ancient artifact, but their like mission to find it may doom humanity even as they try to save another alien race. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out. It just sounds super fun. I like a heist story, and I've heard some really great things about Yume Kitase's writing, so I'm excited to give this one a try. And then the last three of these I bought on my most recent trip to my actual local Barnes & Noble. My mom and I just wanted to get out of the house one evening, so we just went out and kind of browsed around, and I ended up having several things I was really interested in. And on top of that, there was a charity thing going on at my local Barnes & Noble that day, where if you bought something, it presented this coupon that you got when you walked in the door before you checked out. There's a local charity that was going to get a little portion of the cost of your books as a donation. So once I had that in my hands, I felt like I needed to buy something so that I could contribute to that cause. It was a disability advocacy group, and yeah, so I picked up 3 books as part of that. So I picked up Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose, and then this is the Barnes & Noble edition that looks like a VHS, which I think is pretty cool. But this one just sounds like an interesting thriller about some siblings who discover a really creepy home tape when they are cleaning out their parents' house, and they have to figure out what they're going to do about the secret that they've just learned. I think that sounds like it could be fun. Then I got Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This is one that I've been hearing some fantastic reviews of. I've heard so many good things about Chuck Tingle's writing overall, and I know that he also writes some like indie published, self-published erotic fiction online that I think generally people find quite charming and sometimes has a positive message to it. I saw he has one that's about like NFTs and explaining what they are, which I thought was kind of funny and an interesting route of teaching people about that. So I'm really intrigued to give this one a try, and I'm actually going to be reading this one in January because my partner has picked this. This is a little bit of a spoiler for a future video, but this is one of several books my partner has picked for me to read in January, so I'm excited to give it a shot too. And finally, the very last book in this haul is We Solve Murders by Richard Osman. This is another one where I was influenced by other people having a great time with this book. In particular, I think Mara from Books Like Whoa. I'd seen her review like right before we went to the store, and I had to pick it up because of that. This just sounds really charming and sweet, but we're following a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law, and they're solving murders together. I've heard it's very charming. I think Richard Osman is kind of known for heartwarming mysteries, so I'm really interested to give this one a try. I also have the first book in his previous series, The Thursday Murder Club, and I've heard just so many good things, so I'm hopeful to give like both of these a try in the next little while, because I think I would love to find another like mystery series or mystery writer to follow, because I feel like it's been a while since I've had a specific like writer or series that I've been following and enjoying in this particular genre. So those are all of the books that are entering my library this quarter. It's quite a few, but I'm glad that a good chunk of them are read. I think it's a little more than 1/3 of the books that I bought or added to my TBR in some way are already read. So I'm feeling good about that, and I'm feeling good about this momentum going into the beginning of 2025. I'm hopeful we'll continue to see that number come down, and hopefully you will start to see the shelves behind me empty out a little bit. It's a lot of books to read, but everything here I'm so excited for, and I think I'm going to be making some changes to my reading and to my content creation in 2025 that will help me build and maintain momentum. Fingers crossed, anyway. So that's all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments down below what books you've gotten recently that you're excited about, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.